Second Sunday of Advent. Populus Sion is the introit of the second Sunday of Advent. Populus Sion, ecce Dominus veniet ad salvandas gentes, et auditam faciet Dominus gloriam vocis sue, in laetitia cordis vestri. Qui regis Israel intende, qui deducis velut ovem Joseph. Translation: People of Sion, behold, the Lord will come to save the nations, and the Lord will make his glorious voice heard to the rejoicing of your hearts. Shepherd of Israel, hear us, you who lead Joseph like a flock. The text of the Gregorian introit for the second Sunday of Advent merits some preliminary observations and refers more generally to the complex procedure of textual composition undertaken for the songs of the proprium of each Mass. We have seen the simplest procedure with the first Sunday of Advent, where the text of the introit at Te Levavi was the fruit of the selection of a few consecutive verses of Psalm 24. Other times, the biblical verses, most of them taken from the book of Psalms, but not always, are not selected consecutively. In this case, synchronization is required, a stitching together of the various fragments to produce a text capable of ensuring with great concision the highest expressive density. An emblematic case is the Lenten Communio Videns Dominus, which recounts the miracle of the resurrection of Lazarus. The Graduale Triplex, which notes the scriptural references at the beginning of each piece, informs us that the text of this communio, taken from chapter 11 of the Gospel of John, is the result of the synchronization in order of verses 33, 35, 43, 44, 39. The result is the following: Videns Dominus flentes sorores Lazari ad monumentum, lacrimatus est coram Judeis, et clamabat Lazare veni foras, et prodiit ligatis manibus et pedibus, qui fuerat quatriduanus mortuus. Translated, it says, the Lord, seeing the sister of Lazarus weeping at the tomb, broke out weeping before the Jews and cried, Lazarus, come out! And he came out with his hands and feet bound, he who had been dead for 4 days. The synchronization is often accompanied by a real and proper modification of the text through substitutions or additions of words. Thus, for example, in the first phrase of the introit da pacem, it is the first substantive that is modified with respect to the biblical text taken from Sirach, Liber Ecclesiasticus. The original da mercedem sustinentibus te, Sirach, grant recompense to those who wait for you, is replaced with da pacem, grant peace, leaving the rest of the phrase unaltered. Not only that, the most interesting aspect of this metamorphosis of the biblical text does not lie only in selection, in synchronization, in replacement, but rather in the real and proper addition of a new text. Here as well one example stands out above the rest. In the gradual most characteristic of Holy Week, the Christus Factus Est, to the incipit of the famous original text of Paul to Philippians is added pro nobis, Christus factus est pro nobis, obediens usque ad mortem. Christ became for us, obedient to death. So then, the response of Gregorian chant to the procedures of modification of the text is evident. What the liturgy changes, replaces, or adds becomes in musical terms a moment of special expressivity and a focal point in their overall economy of the phrasing. Returning to the examples just cited, da pacem and pro nobis, paradigmatic of this phenomenon, represent the real and special emphasis introduced into their respective passage of origin. We can therefore note with regard to the texts of the proprium various degrees of elaboration destined for song. Each change already manifests, at least in embryonic form, an initial liturgical response of the Church to the biblical text that has been entrusted to it. The definitive response is given by the acoustical result that Gregorian chant intends to assign to it. And so we finally come to the introit populus Sion of the second Sunday of Advent, an example that summarizes what has just been stated. The reference to the book of Isaiah for the anonymous compiler of the text of this introit becomes the launching point for a new and radical re-elaboration. The first original verse of Isaiah, "People of Sion, the Lord will give grace to you," with the second verse, "The Lord will make his majestic voice heard and will show how his arm strikes with burning anger," presents itself in the biblical text for the salvation of Israel. Well then, precisely this text that promises the annihilation of an enemy people is used and radically modified to become, in the first phrase of the introit, a proclamation of universal salvation. The Lord will come to save all peoples. For Gregorian chant, in this case, it is child's play to emphasize this variation of meaning produced by the new text, stressing the intentional contraposition of Sion and gentes. The notator of the Abbey of St. Gall gives even more explicit testimony of this, as we see above in the reproduction of the page of the Graduale triplex, where he adds a valuable indication of meaning to his notation between the text and the square-shaped notes. Over both the accent of Sion and the accent of gentes, there is traced over the respective neumes of 2 and 3 sounds, which are themselves slightly expanded, the letter tenete, almost as if calling for even more emphasis of the value of these words and directing the eye to the intimate relation or position between these two decisive textual elements. After having proclaimed in the introit of the first Sunday of Advent the universality of the coming of Christ, universi qui te expectant non confundentur, on this second Sunday the proclamation becomes even more intense. To the elect people, Populus Sion, is proclaimed the work of the Lord not through the annihilation of other peoples, but through their salvation. Following in the footsteps of this first phrase, the text of Isaiah used for the second phrase, et auditam faciet Dominus gloriam vocis sue, almost naturally takes on a new color and markedly joyous tone, translated musically with bold melodic leaps and expressive emphasis, with the use of the highest register of the piece and prolonged insistence on the same melodic figures. The mode of this introit, in fact, is the Tetrardus Authenticus, seventh mode, whose customary use of the higher register combines well with the quality of such a proclamation of salvation. The final rejoicing of heart represents to perfection the echo of this, and the conclusion of the cadence.
Soul.